I own 3 different companies, and between those 3 companies, I employ over 75 people a year. And in this episode, we're going to be diving into when I decide if I'm going to train someone or I'm going to terminate someone, and how I make those decisions and what it is I'm going to do to get the employee to where I want them or decide it's time to part ways. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Cheer Biz Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Cotton, and today we are talking about, is it time to train or time to terminate? Now, this is a hot episode. We're going to be having a lot of really important conversation, and I know you guys are going to want to get right into the content. But before we do, please make sure you head on over to Cheer Gym Owners on Facebook and All-Star Cheer Coaches and Owners, and you've joined both of those groups, because some of the very subjects that I talk about on the podcast come from those groups, come from questions that people are asking. And I want to make sure that you are able to go there and you're able to get access to me, have me respond to some of your questions, and give me some great ideas for the podcast. All right. So this actually did not come from Facebook. This was not something that anyone was talking about on Facebook. This is somewhere where I am as a business owner, where I am constantly, honestly, I'm always having to look at my employees and am I getting a good return on investment for this employee? And is this employee someone that is doing a great job and is deserving of a raise? Or is this someone that needs additional training? Or is this someone that maybe it's time to let them go? And there is always a bit of a soul searching moment when you're looking at an employee of whether or not you're going to train or whether or not you're going to terminate. And I've been at this long enough where there are certain circumstances where I think you should train, and there are certain circumstances where I think you should absolutely terminate. And we're going to dive into those and what I do in both scenarios. So first and foremost, how do we get here? So at some point in time, you're going to have an employee who is struggling. They are not meeting the standard. They're not aligning with the culture. There's a variety of things that can be going on with an employee that are going to lead you down the path of like, is this something that I need to train this person in, or is this something that I need to go down the termination route of? Now, I'm a big believer in extreme ownership, which means I'm always wondering, what is it that I should have done differently to avoid this circumstance? And I've talked about this before, but many times the thing that you should have done differently is not hired the person to begin with. They weren't a good cultural alignment on the front end, and you should have noticed that at the beginning. Then after there, did you train them correctly from the beginning? Did they get the proper training? Now, if you have developed a good system and you have a process that you run each and every employee through, it's going to be much more likely that you can say, yes, they got good training because I know everyone gets the same training as they get hired. This is something that I was heavily involved in when I was at the police department. My last assignment was as a senior training officer. And my job was not only to be the firearms instructor, the head firearms instructor for the entire department, but was to help train new recruits, which was a large portion of my job, was training new officers who got hired in small groups in our in-house orientation academies to prepare them for the state academy and prepare them to go out and serve the public on the road. And making sure that we had a very standardized process was incredibly important. It was incredibly important to ensure that everyone had the same basis of knowledge when they hit the road. It was also incredibly important when we were looking at whether or not we should retain a potential recruit. Because when we were training these people, if they were not living up to the standard that has been set for everyone, and that has been upheld numerous times and other people in the class are able to meet, then we can say this person does not meet the standard, and therefore we are going to go for separation because they're not capable of achieving what we need them to achieve. And even then, we had to make the determination of, okay, is this something that we can do remedial training? And we always leaned heavily into doing remedial training for these new individuals because sometimes it just takes people a little bit longer to get something. So we would do additional training. We would go to the range more and work on their firearm skills, or we would deal with confrontational simulation more and get them in situations where they had to make decisions under stress. And we would still have officers who couldn't couldn't do it. And it was much better to identify those problems in training than it was to identify them in the street where someone was potentially going to get hurt or a law was going to potentially be broken. So that's how it related with that. So I have a lot of experience there in that initial training process. From there, if we've done a good job with our initial hiring, there were no red flags and we trained them well to a good standard. Then we're looking at, okay, have we not upheld a standard so this person didn't know that what the standard was? Or has it just been so long since this person got additional training that it's unreasonable to expect them to know? Now, if you are in that position where you've done all of those things, they have additional training, they should know, and you've had corrective interventions and things like that, then we're going to probably be leaning in that termination route. Now, if we're not there, or even if they should know, they've been trained, they had good onboarding, they had consistent training, they have had corrective action. Now we're at that point of, okay, basically everyone's in the same point. This employee is not doing well. Whatever the issue is, they're showing up late, they're seem disinterested, they're on their phone frequently, they're sitting down during classes, whatever the rule is, right? They're having issues. Whether or not we go down the train or terminate path is going to be very, very dictated by my belief in this person's willingness to grow. So if I've had conversations and I've noted there is a change for a period of time, then that person is at least willing to modify and regulate their behaviors or their actions in a manner that may align with our standards. So I might give this person more of a chance. I might give them a training opportunity. But if I've had the same conversation with someone 4 times, then they're not ready to grow. They're not willing to change. And or if I talk to this individual and they're immediately defensive and they say they haven't done anything wrong and they don't understand why I'm being mean to them, whatever that situation may look like, then we may be leaning in the direction of it's time to terminate because this person is not showing a willingness to learn and grow. And ultimately, that has to be the determining factor when I'm looking at an employee of train versus terminate. Is the only way I can retain someone and go down the train route is if they're willing to be trained, if they're willing to acknowledge that they have shortcomings and that they need to do certain things better. And if they're unwilling to acknowledge those things, then how am I supposed to train this person? They're never going to get better. It would be like training an athlete and saying, hey, we're going to make your back handspring better. And they go, my back handspring's perfect. I don't have anything to fix. And you go, well, your legs are like a mile apart and your arms are pretty far apart and you bend your arms, you even bounce off of your head. And they're like, that's the way I do my back handspring. There's no better way. I'm sorry, I can't learn. Or you're wrong, I didn't hit my head. Meanwhile, you have video proof. And they're like, you're still wrong. The video is lying. That would be someone that says, I can't train you. I can't teach you anything new because you're unwilling to learn. So I'm looking for a willingness to learn. If I've identified the willingness to learn from the employee, then I'm going to go into my training route. A training route can consist of a lot of different things, but I need to make sure that I'm training to the issue that I'm having and that I'm not only training, but I am doing a check on learning and I have some sort of a process in place to verify that that learning sticks and corrective action if I find that that learning hasn't stuck. And then I'm going to take some sort of an intervention. So what this might look like is I have an employee who let's say they frequently sit down during practice and appear disinterested when coaching. Okay, so we would do a training on that. And how that training might look is talking them through ways to look interested, things that they can change about their face, about their demeanor, about their actions. We would probably train on practice planning or class planning so they can be more prepared for classes. And in terms of not sitting down or like body language, I might even make them watch body language from the lobby and see what it looks like from a parent's perspective or see what it looks like from a kid's perspective and do some role play in that scenario where I'm going to sit down and coach them and say, how do you receive that versus, and then stand up and coach them and just give them those different deliveries so they can see the different ways that that can impact a client's experience. And then from there, after they've had the training, there's going to be some sort of check on learning. I'm going to ask them to demonstrate the skills, and then I'm going to observe them in the environment that they need to be executing those skills, to include giving them spot corrections in the moment, saying, hey, you could do this a little bit differently or that a little bit differently, and help them be prepared for doing it on their own once they're like approved. After we've done our check on learning, we have to have our little spot corrections as we go. So we've got to keep checking in on those classes, on the actions, and make sure if they're starting to get off path, we do a quick reorientation. It's much easier to reorient an employee who's starting to get back on a bad path than it is to correct them after they're way far down that path. And not only are they disinterested, but they're texting on their phone and they're rude to the kids and they're showing up late. Like, now we've got too many problems to fix in one. So it's much easier to address those issues immediately when they come up. Now, if this person is unwilling to learn, or you don't believe they're capable of learning, then it is time to go the termination route. Termination does not need to be some mystical, complicated, and highly dramatic circumstance. I understand that emotions are involved when getting terminated from a job. I understand that emotions are going to be even more involved, especially if this employee has been a long-standing employee. But if you have a long-standing employee that you are getting to the point where you have to terminate because of these kind of behaviors, then there were a number of things that were missed along the way. They probably should have been fired much earlier, or there were corrective actions that needed to be taken that weren't, that now allowed this employee to get so far down the path that the only possible option is to let them go. But if you have an employee who's within the first 12 to even 24 months, I think it's very reasonable to say that you may not have done as much wrong and it's just time to let this person go. It can take people a variety of amount of time to show their true colors. It's not always something that you're going to see within the first month or 2 months or 3 months, right? There's a honeymoon period. That honeymoon period is going to vary for any employee versus how long it is. So just know that just because it didn't go right doesn't mean that it was your fault if we've gone back and looked at those other things. So we're at the point of termination. And this is me demystifying it. Obviously, you need to make sure that you check with your state laws. I am not giving you advice from an attorney perspective. I'm giving you advice from a business owner perspective. So make sure you've chatted with an attorney and you know the legal steps that you have to meet to terminate someone. So I'm just going to speak from the state of Oregon. I have done this a couple different ways. And I hate firing people. It's one of my least favorite things to do, actually, because ultimately when you start a relationship with an employee, they want to do a good job. You want them to do a good job. Everyone wants it to work out. So it's never fun to terminate someone, to let them go. It's always disappointing. But when we're in this position where we need to let an employee go, we need to just demystify it. Meaning, we don't need a whole bunch of explanations. There doesn't need to be a long conversation. It doesn't need to become something that is highly dramatic. It just needs to be, hey, we are no longer continuing your employment at this gym. We wish you all the best. Here's your check. Have a great day. That's it. That's all that needs to be discussed. Now, you may be listening and saying, wow, that's really, really hurtful if you're not going to give them a long explanation, or shouldn't you give them a write-up of all of the things that they did wrong? Well, I have some concerns on giving write-ups, and I have done that. The concerns I have with giving write-ups is, one, what if you left something off? And now that puts in writing all of the reasons that you terminated them. And what if you find out additional things after you've let them go? What if you let someone go and you find out, oh yeah, they were having relationships outside of policy with clients, with parents. They were going and hanging out at athletes' houses and watching movies. I'm not alleging anything like impropriety wise that would be illegal, but just like violating your policies and procedures. They were staying up until 2 a.m. talking to an athlete on the phone about their boyfriend. You didn't know that. You didn't cite it in their termination papers, but now they can come back and say, well, that's not why you terminated me, and, wrongful termination, et cetera. It's just easier to say, we've terminated you. We no longer need your employment, and we're going to be going a different direction. We're going to be going a different direction is definitely hurtful. Like it hurts to hear because it doesn't give you a lot of information, but it is a very simple, direct, we're not going to be continuing your employment. We're doing something else. We're hiring someone else for your position. We don't need you anymore. And if they really want explanations and you feel that they're going to listen, you can say, the reasons that we're letting you go are X, Y, and Z. You were consistently late. We didn't see the corrections to behaviors that we've already talked to you about. So it's because of all of those reasons that we've just decided to go another direction. You can just leave it all at that. You don't need to get into long, drawn out discussions and arguments because ultimately you're not going to change your mind. And if you thought this person was capable of changing these things, then you would have retained them and trained them. So you giving them that input is, yes, you may be saying, well, I'm trying to help them for the future. One, that's not your obligation. And two, you've already let this person go because you don't think they're willing to change or willing to learn. So spending a bunch of time diving into all of the things that they are doing that made it so they got terminated is really just a fool's errand. And I don't recommend doing it. It just gives the ability for there to be explosive emotional conversations and arguments. And, well, I didn't do that. And, well, that's not true. And I don't want you, if you're in that position, to get into long semantic arguments because we instinctively want to defend ourselves. So when you leave the conversation closed, right? I'm opening the conversation with, I appreciate you coming in today. I want to let you know that we're no longer going to be continuing your employment at XYZ All Stars. Here is your final check. We wish you nothing but the best. Thank you. We will not need you at all. If they have a key, right, turn in your company equipment, things like that. You need to check if you're an at-will state. Some states are not at-will, meaning you can't fire employees whenever you want. But the vast majority of states in the US that I know of are at-will states, meaning you can fire people for any reason at any time. And it doesn't even have to be for cause. You can just say, hey, we're going to let you go. We don't want to continue your employment here. And you don't have to do anything else but that. When you start to put things in writing, you start to lock yourself into a story and you actually open yourself to more liability, in my opinion, than you do by just simply saying, we're no longer continuing your employment. We wish you the best. And there's nothing wrong with saying you wish someone the best, because just because you don't want them to work there anymore doesn't mean you wish them ill will. So I do wish people the best. I want them to go be successful. They're just not going to be successful at my gym. And that's it. Very simple, very straightforward, not fun. But if it's simple, it's straightforward, it's honest, you're doing the right thing for your business, then you should feel good about the decision that you are making. All right, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode on train or terminate. It is always a challenge if you're a business owner or a manager trying to determine whether or not to retain an employee or let them go. But you ultimately have the power to make the decision. Take the emotion out of it, make the decision that is best for the business, best for your employees, and best for yourself. All right. Thank you for listening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. And with that, we'll catch you on the next episode.